And one of the things I saw in the packet as I was preparing for that interview is they appear to have a much lower bar for what can make it onto their air than they do for what can make it onto CNN.com, like their digital website. The defamation standard is the same. You don't, he has to prove the same whether he's been defamed by an anchor or, a producer writing for the website. But I was kind of shocked at how lazy and lackluster CNN apparently is about what goes out on what most people know CNN for, which is its airwaves, all this internal correspondence, which we'll get to, on how it's like, it's very sloppy, it's full of holes, but it's fine for CNN. We can't put it on digital. What do you make of that, CNN? I mean, you used to work at CNN, but what do you make of that?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting point. I mean, what is, I think, probably a bigger picture interest to me is this follows the big payout by George Stephanopoulos and ABC to Donald Trump, which was 15 million or whatever it was. You're beginning to see quite big payouts for people who've said things on air on cable news and now being held to proper account for it. Many people think that's long overdue. So I think that people are probably having a very nervous time now in cable news. The days of just saying whatever you feel like with no accountability for it, they're long gone. And I think that you're now seeing people on the receiving end going on the attack legally and exercising their rights to say, no, this is wrong. You've defamed me. And by the way, if you do that, you're going to pay a lot of money. And they're all running scared. They're all settling. The CNN went to court to defend itself, but the moment it got to punitive damages, they bailed because they knew it might be really horrifically high, that figure. ABC bailed in a way that I think horrified a lot of their staff, but actually quite rightly, because George Stephanopoulos repeatedly in that interview repeatedly defamed Donald Trump and repeatedly said that he'd been convicted of a crime he hadn't been convicted of. And if you're going to do that, I'm sorry, it doesn't matter who you are. If you and I did that on our platform, we would also be susceptible to people suing us for defamation. There shouldn't be some sort of loftier than thou rule that just because you work for one of the legacy media, you work to different rules. So I think the worm is changing very quickly here. And people are being held. It would have been really interesting in the Russia collusion mayhem of the first 2 years of Trump's term in office, if he decided to go after all those networks and all those journalists who perpetuated what turned out to be a complete myth for 2 years. A, he would have ended up extremely rich, and B, it might have nipped it in the bud, because at the time, a lot of us were saying, you were saying, I was saying, that this is ridiculous. There is no actual hard evidence to support this, and yet it's dominating the news agenda now for years, and turned out to be a nothing burger of monumental proportions, but a nothing burger that caused Donald Trump a lot of damage. And, it would have been really interesting if he'd sued at the time about that stuff, because it did turn out to be nonsense. And he knew it was nonsense because he was the one that was being accused of it.
Mm-hmm. I know. There's been absolutely no proof of it. You've got just this week, last week before the inauguration, AOC saying, I'm not going to the inauguration because I don't support rapists. That is a defamatory statement. She didn't make clear that's opinion. She said it as though it were a matter of fact. It isn't. And I really think he should give some serious thought to suing her. She wasn't on the legislative floor. She was sitting in her apartment doing a little Instagram. You can't get away with that. You can't, a term like he's a rapist or he's committing potential treason in working with the Russians. Like, news organizations have just, and politicians for that matter, given up all the guardrails that we used to observe. We used to at least try to be more careful. I still try to be careful. I'm certainly never trying to be reckless out here. I'm very relentlessly fact-based, and not to say we're always perfect. But, if you make a mistake, you clean it up and you do it transparently. I've seen you do that too. There is an irresponsibility that's taken hold of certain of our news organizations when it comes to Trump, and politicians too. It's no accident. It's usually about him, Piers, that is really kind of unprecedented.
Yeah, it is. And you're completely right about AOC. She brazenly repeated in a private capacity, as you say, not on the floor of the House or anything like that. She did it in her own home to the world on her account. She put it out there, repeating the exact same defamation that George Stephanopoulos had said on air that cost ABC $15 million. So if you're going to be that brazen, think about what a judge or a courtroom would make of that. They'd say, well, you could hardly pretend you didn't know This has literally been a massive headline-grabbing settlement in the last few weeks. And you've decided that it doesn't apply to you. That somehow you are on some superior plane to George Stephanopoulos, which allows you to call Trump a rapist and get away with it. Well, if I was Trump, I'd call her bluff. I'd sue her. And by the way, he'd win. Just like he did with ABC. And so I do think that you need to have more of this accountability. And people will say, well, what about free speech? It's not about free speech. It's a bit like what I said about the real-life alleged stalker from Baby Reindeer. If Netflix is going to put out, I love Netflix, a very successful company. I use it all the time, just to be clear. But
same.
Netflix is going to broadcast a 7-part series, which they say at the start of it, this is a true story. So every time you logged on to watch an episode, this is a true story. And then you say in that true story that Richard Gadd, who's the writer and who's the guy who plays himself in the series, if you then depict him being forensically stalked by this woman who then gets convicted and put in prison, and it turns out they claim has already had a previous prison sentence, and none of that is true, then little wonder that she's now taken out a massive lawsuit against Netflix. But why would Netflix do that? Why would you call it a true story without A, doing the due diligence of whether actually this was true, or B, worse, it's true, but you don't care? And there's a little bit of that about Donald Trump, isn't there? Well, a lot of that about Donald Trump, which is, I think a lot of journalists feel they can say whatever they like about him, and that's fine. And I think what he did with the Stephanopoulos case is put a line in the sand and say, right, if you guys are going to defame me on fact, and you mentioned earlier, you try and stick to facts. You're a lawyer by background. I'm a newspaper editor by background. We know how important facts are. It's not to say we've always been faultless ourselves, but it's to say we understand the importance of veracity. We don't come from the Meghan Markle, my truth school of bogus.
No.
We come from the facts are actual facts. Now, you can then, if you take a fact, you can then comment as you wish about it. You can interpret a fact any way you like. You can be as opinionated as you want. Right, but what you can't do is do that about something which isn't true, because then you're just defaming people. And there's no point in that, because you lose trust with your viewers if you keep doing that. If they know you're saying one thing, but actually it's not true, and you repeat that, I think you're pretty dead in the water as a broadcaster who'd be taken seriously by anybody. But B, why do it? In AOC's case, she's done that deliberately. She's almost taunting Trump. Come and sue me. And if I were him, he probably hasn't got time or the inclination, but if I was him, I'd call her bluff.
Increased tariffs on our trade partners, tax cuts, and regulation changes. There's a reason why gold is a diversification tactic now more than ever. Birch Gold is releasing their ultimate guide for gold in the Trump era with a foreword by Donald Trump Jr. To get your free copy, along with Birch Gold's free information kit on gold, text MK to the number 989898. Here are the facts. The national debt continues to increase. Our interest payments on the national debt continue to increase. So gold is an important option, and it can be your hedge against a weakened dollar. Birch Gold can convert an existing IRA or 401k into a tax-sheltered IRA in gold. Text MK to 989898 for your free copy of the ultimate guide for gold in the Trump era. There's no obligation, just information. With an A+ rating from the Better Business Bureau, countless 5-star reviews, and thousands of happy customers, find out more about Birch Gold. There is a reason so many people love these guys and take all or just a small part of their existing IRAs and move them over into gold with Birch. Text MK to the number 989898 today. Thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.